Chapter 5. Cole. Brad and I had earlier discussed the play and the actors as we strolled over to the college, and headed inside to my office. It didn't take much time to go over all the students who were up for the roles, because a walk through the campus discussing the play and who would play the leading parts was done in 15 minutes. We'd both settled on Shakespeare, and since this was for a freshman drama class, and everyone loved Romeo and Juliet, where they'd probably played one or a number of the roles in high school, we assured each other that we could be successful with little or no effort on our parts if the actors learned their lines, and the weather was good that day, but who could predict the weather this early? However, we had great expectations for our luck. Brad stated that the play should be presented as an outdoor event, because the weather in the fall was great in Nevermore. Not too hot and not too cold, just right. I wished my relationship with Keys was just right, but it had gone off the rails, and I didn't know how to right this train. I could have met him halfway, but I had been pissed that he'd rode his motorcycle, and he looked so sexy that everyone was eyeing him, including Brad, who appeared to want a piece of my handsome husband, along with all the other gay men sitting around eyeing his ass in those leather chaps. When I heard what Brad had said, and saw Keys all dressed up in black leather, looking like prime real estate, his thick muscular arms filled with tattoos, hard legs, wide shoulders, and his handsome face with a light beard, and when he smiled there was nothing as striking and inviting as this man I'd married. Keys was my man, and because of a moment of jealousy, I'd probably ruined everything between us. No amount of apologies could forgive what I'd done. I admit, I was nasty and short in the coffee shop, but I didn't want this to be a train wreck, I thought. I needed to salvage my relationship and figure out a way to do it like yesterday. Contrary to what Keys thought and what I'd conveyed to him, I had been happy and surprised to see him. I should have made that known, but instead I acted like a dick. He looked too sexy, all dressed up in that leather outfit, and I could blame it on shock seeing him that way, but I should have kissed him and told him something, but I didn't. When Brad first laid eyes on him, I saw the blush in Brad's cheeks, and the way he swiped his tongue around his mouth. He wished he had what I had. That made my cock jerk, thinking that maybe we could get back what we had lost through too much work and not making enough time for what mattered, each other. I wasn't playing hard to get, or maybe I was, but I wanted Keys to seduce me the way he'd done when we first met. It was at a bar, and he'd just come home from Afghanistan when I'd strode into that place with Grail, when Grail was going through changes of his own because of his ailing father and his relationship with Austin. Grail had returned to Nevermore to check on his father and get away from New York, and probably Austin, his ever-missing in-action partner, and I agreed to have a drink with him as a friend. I probably needed to get out and have a drink too, because of the students and their excuses why they missed classes, arguing over their grades, and other things I'd gone through as a college student. Grail and I were sitting at the bar, and had ordered a shot of vodka, and when my eye caught the tall, wide-shouldered, muscled guy who looked as if he could be a bouncer, I couldn't take my eyes off him, and it appeared he thought the same. He stared at me before he stood, leaned on the bar, and told the bartender to give us drinks on him. I offered a wide smile to that good-looking dude, took off my glasses, and said, "Thanks." I wished I could have said more, but I was stunned that he thought I was what he wanted that night. A nerd like me. I couldn't figure that out. He was gorgeous, tall, and all muscles, and appeared straight as an arrow, as the saying went. When he neared us in the direction of the restroom, Keys said, "You're welcome. Any time." Our eyes locked, then I placed my hand on Grail's shoulder and said, "I'll be back." There was a song playing, and I couldn't forget it if I wanted to. It was the day that changed the trajectory of my life. The song was Perfect by Ed Sheeran. "Don't have me sitting here too long alone," Grail announced as I stood, and he placed the shot glass to his lips, threw back his head, turned and glanced at me and said, "Because I'll drink too much and you'll have to drive," Grail warned. I turned to him. "I'm just going to get the guy's number." It won't take long. As I sauntered into the restroom, thinking and praying that he was a bottom, it didn't take me long before I found out. Keys had left the stall open, and I stood looking at the door, trying to gather my courage before I jerked it open. I sucked in a deep breath. Better now than never, I thought. I could see that we were the only two in the bathroom, and when I peeked down I saw his biker boots and combat pants. I pulled open the door, an experience that to this day gave me chills every time I remembered my first time with him, and I'd never had anything as erotic and satisfying when it came to having sex with him or before him. Although I'd thought about dissolving my marriage with Keys, and all indications were we drifted apart because of the workload we were putting in, it was the thought of that experience I had that day in the bar that I didn't want to walk away from the feeling I'd gotten each time we'd made love, and the beautiful patient man I knew Keys was. Whenever I eased into bed near Keys, after sitting up all night sending out letters and correcting papers while waiting for him to come from the garage after working, I didn't know how many hours he was in that shop, but even if he was tired, he'd offer his body to me. He was a giving man, at wanting him, but not wanting him because he'd kept me waiting all night. At first, I refused to admit that I was equally to blame for the gulf that had built up between us, because we both didn't have the time for each other, but I'd always found some excuse that brought Keys in guilty. However, it wasn't always like that. We'd hang out at the beach, go to the movies, watch old movies with popcorn on the weekends, while lying in bed resting and making love all day. Those were the days I wanted back. Then we both had jobs that never paid much of anything, until Keys took his retirement pay, opened his own shop, and things took off from there. Before he enlisted, he'd worked at a garage as a mechanic, and when he'd gotten an honorable discharge because of PTSD, and when I saw the work he'd done restoring and repairing cars, I was all for him getting his own shop. I'd saved a little money by working off and on, going to college on loans, and I offered it to Keys because I thought it would help our future together. Needless to say, Keys became successful, and now we were paying the price for it. My thoughts were interfered by a knock on my office door. I glanced at the clock on the wall. I had an hour to sit in my office, check my emails for directives, schedule meetings with students who chose to hide behind an email when it came time to turn in papers and exams, and I didn't have much time left. I huffed at the interruption, stood, and answered it after staring at my computer and being lost in my feelings for longer than I cared to. "Hi Brad, I thought you had classes about now." I looked up at the clock, and then down at the antique watch on my arm, which was more of an ornament than something to tell time with. It was always late and not in good working order, and I'd promised my granny to get it fixed, but had never got around to doing that. I lied. "I just wanted to talk to you about something." Oh shit, here it comes. We were friends, and I didn't know how to tell him that we could only be friends, because I was madly in love with Keys, even if I hadn't shown it lately. Or he could have noticed the coolness I'd showed Keys, and wanted to make a play for him, but needed to get my permission. Or I'd heard of people having threesomes to get some fire back into their marriage. Whatever it was, I wasn't going for it. Keys was mine. I strode to my desk and sat, and Brad looked around, eyeing the stacks of papers covering the part of the desk the computer didn't. "You still grade hard copies?" he questioned as he paced the length of my desk and used his pen to correct a paper I hadn't gotten to. Staring at him, "You can't do that." He looked at me and grinned. "Force of habit, I guess." I pulled the paper away and placed it in the stack of next in line to be graded. "Yeah, I'm accepting hard copies because for some reason I get the same excuses from most of my students, which are, my computer crashed, I don't have internet service, or one of the oldies but goodies, my granny died, and I didn't have time to write or send you the paper from Oklahoma, and she didn't have internet. What does a 90-year-old woman need with the internet?" they'd say to me. Brad chuckled and sat across from my desk. Don't get me wrong, Cole, but I had no one to share this with. Oh, here it comes. He was either going to cross the line, or I was going to be embarrassed at the end of this conversation. There's this guy who likes the same, how can I put this, fetish. I listened quietly, and was relieved that Brad didn't want to strike up a relationship with me and Keys. I couldn't handle anyone now, especially since I thought Keys was having an affair. I couldn't prove it, and I didn't want to. I thought if I'd gone looking for something, I'd have to decide then if I would leave him, or risk looking like a fool, and what if I couldn't handle what I found? Then I'd beg him to stay with me, and that would be a bummer. Catching the end of what Brad had said, I glanced over at him with a raised eyebrow, not because I was judging, but because I didn't hear everything, because my mind had been full of my own thoughts, and I'd pretended that I had heard what he'd said. I hope you're not judging me, Cole. I guess I showed him the wrong face. I meant to show the concerned face, but I was too into my own problems, and he must have seen a furrowed brow. Raising my hand, oh no, I wouldn't do that, but tell me again who it is, and if you feel comfortable talking about his age. You know some of these guys look older than they really are these days, what with the tattoos and the rings in their noses, and the purple hair. He's a senior in college and graduating this fall, and no, he doesn't have a tattoo. Well, none that I can see yet. Brad smiled and he glanced down, but I would like it if he had a tattoo or two, and there's no purple hair. I can't see there being a conflict of interest if he's a senior in college. High school is definitely out. I glanced at Brad to see if he had been lying to me when he said a senior in college, and I thought he had told me the truth, and you're both consenting adults, not a problem. Brad shifted in his seat, as if he had more on his mind than he wanted to reveal. Nevertheless, he continued with the same line of conversation. You see, I've been interested in experimenting with guys who dress like cats, and in women's garments when I'm having sex, and then there's the other thing. I raised my hand for him to stop. Too much information. Do you think I'm weird? Brad asked. I had no answer for that. What could I say? It wasn't my lifestyle, but Brad was the master of his own fate, came to mind. Therefore I stood and said, I have to get to class because there's a student I have to talk to before class begins. He should be there just about now, I said, looking up at that large, ever-present clock. I'll give you my opinion another time, when I've thought this over. Brad took the hint and left, and gave me time to catch my breath. I wasn't passing judgment on his fetishes and kinks, but to each his own, and whatever turns him on is all right with me. I'd just been relieved to know that I didn't have to disappoint him by refusing any advances I thought he would make, and now we could have a friendly relationship, as long as he didn't ask me to put on a catsuit or what other fetish he wanted to talk about, but I wouldn't let him. I'd listen to his problems and not make a comment even if I wanted to, and he thought enough of me to tell me about his secrets, which I never would divulge to my best friend Grail or my husband whom I love dearly. And then I realized that there was someone for everyone out there, if they connected in the right way, and they enjoyed the same type of lovemaking, whether they fucked in a catsuit or not. Maybe I should take the time to show Keys how much I appreciated and loved him, simply because he didn't ask me to wear a catsuit, or some of that other stuff Bradley was into and wanted to discuss.